Okay, so welcome to everybody. Great to have you online with us today for the first webinar in our Protecting Your Future program. The webinar is going to run for about 30 minutes, but we're allowing about 45 minutes and we can go a little bit longer if necessary. I think we've found with most of these that some of the best parts of it have been the questions and the Q&A at the end. So I've kept it as a webinar, just because with the numbers we have, it's hard to have so many faces all over the screen. But I will be able to take questions through the chat. If you raise your hand when we get to the Q&A, I'll give you the floor and we can have some open discussion. So feel free to sort of capture any questions in the Q&A as we go, or save them up to the end, and I can give you the floor as we go through. Okay, so as I said, this is the first webinar of this program, Protecting Your Future. I'm going to talk a bit about how we can adapt now as we move through this COVID situation into what hopefully will be a slightly more normal, if that's a word we want to keep using, future. I have in the general handout, general resources, given you a bit of a survive, adapt, thrive roadmap that we used when we did the first program around survive, adapt, and thrive. There was a bit of a business leader roadmap that was included. So I put that in the general resources. So feel free to reference that at any point if you want to, and any questions on that. And what we've done, because we've now gone into a second program, which we're calling Protecting Your Future, and because this is kind of the life cycle, what I've done is I've put them together into 5 webinar series. We're going to drop the survive because I think most people are through that now. But in terms of today, focus on adapt. I will just give a couple of survive reminders from the first webinar that happened on that. And if you do want to go back to that, then let me know and I'll give you access to a recording. But for the bulk of the next half an hour, we're going to really talk about how do we reset your short-term vision. A little bit about how we sort of start to exploit short-term opportunities, and then how do we really start to challenge our models moving forward. And I know from the questions at registration, I think quite a few of you are needing to adapt your model slightly, and even some of you needing to possibly even completely re-engineer your businesses. So let's get started. Just those quick reminders. So I'm sure most of you have, but if you haven't done your disaster scenario planning, you should have done. If you want to access our recording, we recorded our whole process on this back at the beginning of the crisis. I probably would say though, I think what was interesting in the first webinar was even then most people had done some scenario planning. I think the challenge is how many people had really kept on top of it and adapted that and kept it alive through the process. So there are some good things in this recording around not just doing the disaster scenario planning, but actually checking with yourself about are we keeping that alive and are we adapting it as we move forward? Because obviously a lot of your scenario plan would have been built around assumptions. And of course, we only realize what they are as we move through. The other thing I wanted to share from this piece before we get into the bulk of today was just, I think, a bit of a caution about how people are feeling. We're on this kind of journey where obviously we hit a crisis. We then went into survival mode and needed to gain control. And then I think there was this pivot point where, I think that's probably where we are today, where we're now getting a bit of ray of light. We're starting to build some hope for the future, and then we'll move into recovery and people will be positive again. But I think the way business people are feeling and the mindset is interesting to bear in mind around that. Clearly at the beginning, lots of devastation and uncertainty. That survival phrase people found exhausting, and lots of sense of loss of purpose for many people. And I think as we now move through, we're getting that ray of light, feeling we're going to be okay. Hopefully then we can see that opportunity again and get energized. I think that the real watch here is that watching our message as leaders, as narratives, is really important. And I've put here for clients because I think the thing with clients is they're not all at the same place at the same time. So although we may be in that ray of light and feeling okay, some of our clients may still be back in that survival phase. But I think even more important, I think, is as when I talk to business leaders, the leaders are kind of ahead of their people. So most of my leaders are in that ray of light space, but most of their workforces are still very exhausted, and there's a real sense of loss of purpose. So I think we need to be careful that we don't assume our people are at the same point of the journey as us, and that might need some managing on our part. And just the last couple of things to share from that first session. One was about stress. We talked a bit about stress, and just very quickly on this, I think this is just a check-in for you. I think people were stressed, and I think stress tends to manifest in 2 ways. Either we're very backward-looking, kind of almost bemoaning what's happened to us, which can make you feel quite depressed, and stress is very depressed-based. Or I think where most people were very anxious, kind of looking to the future, but worrying about what may or may not happen. And of course, we don't actually know what may or may not happen in many instances, but that feeling of anxiety is not healthy. So I think it's just a sort of checking kind of where is your stress? Is it future-based? Is it past-based? And of course, what we want to try and do is get into the present in where we can actually control things and what we call that more mindful state. And I think the other thing we kind of talked about on that was, you know, mindful isn't the same as having your mind full. So just having your head full of tons of stuff is not going to help you either. We want to just try and get in the present and in the moment, and be working on the things that we can control. And the last thing just to share on this is, this has been really interesting. It's a great article in the Harvard Business Review by Scott Berinato on the 6 stages of grief, and linking it straight into the COVID situation. I recommend you just look that up and read it. But many people I'm talking to are definitely going through these stages of grief, and I've even got people talking to. I had a conversation with the CEO of an big NHS hospital yesterday, who you know, has actually got people quoting. Understand the grief stages, you know, that where they are in this cycle. So you may well find your people are actually displaying grief symptoms as a consequence of what's going on. So that hopefully will give you something else just to think about as you manage your people. Okay, I went through that quite quickly, conscious of time, but just wanted to share those couple of things with you. In terms of today, first I wanted to start on was this notion of resetting your short-term vision. I just thought I'd share this advert with you. I wondered if you'd answer this ad. This was an ad in the Times in 1913. So, wanted for hazardous journey, small wages, bitter cold, long months of complete darkness, constant danger, safe return doubtful, honour and recognition in case of success. So that was an advert placed by Ernest Shackleton. I wonder if you placed it now, it wouldn't be too dissimilar for the COVID situation. But remarkably, 3,800 people replied to that ad, wanted to go on Shackleton's adventure to the South Pole. He'd previously been to the South Pole with Scott, but because of sickness didn't make the fateful journey across the ice, but then wanted to go back and be the first person to cross the Antarctic continent side to side. Now, the reason I wanted to share this, because it's an interesting, because this expedition was a complete disaster, but it probably now is one of the most exemplar leadership stories that we have. Very quickly on the story, they got trapped in ice within the first year of the journey, and spent several months on floating ice before their ship was completely crushed and lost to the sea, and then spent the best part of 2 years getting home, which they all did very successfully. And if you want to read the story, but more importantly, I think learn the lessons of leadership that came from it, this book, Leading at the Edge, is a great read at any time, but I think at the moment, particularly a good read. And there are 10 big lessons from this book that are shared. And I wanted to share the first one, which is this: never losing sight of the ultimate goal and focus on the short-term objectives. And when we talk about resetting the short-term vision, what was interesting is one of the things that Shackleton did very quickly, once they lost their ship, he shifted the path and that short-term vision from crossing Antarctica to just getting everyone home alive, which I said, apart from the dogs, he did very, very successfully. But what was interesting is the summit was and always remained the same, because the actual outcome that Shackleton wanted was to get home and tell the story. So the message from this is his summit didn't change, but he was smart enough to know the initial vision to get across the ice was futile, and he had to shift that to getting home alive. And I think I want you to think about, you know, for you, your summit in terms of what you want to achieve, either personally or for your business, probably hasn't shifted. But what we've had is a huge avalanche come through the middle of it. So probably you're going to need a new path. So I think for most of us, the mountain's the same, but the path to the summit will probably be different. So, you know, the ropes, the guides, the plans we had are probably gone. So we're going to need to set some new plans. I think for most people, there'll be a resetting of timings. And I think we just have to accept that's okay. And I think definitely need, if we're going to have to build a new path and a new plan, need to think about realigning our people to that as well. And I'll talk a bit more about that at next week's webinar. Okay, so in terms of short-term opportunities, I think it's important to get some perspective. So in terms of, there's a few things I thought I'd share with you in terms of, you know, getting some perspective on where we are. There's definitely an opportunity to exploit, and I use that word carefully, because in the right way. I think we've seen the big stories of the Louis Vuittons, you know, moving to PPE, and BrewDog making hand sanitizer. You know, even here in the West Midlands, manufacturers, you know, running together to make ventilators, as Dyson did as well. And even in my local area here, in my local independent coffee shop, you know, he's been closed for business now for the best part of 3 months, but he's converted his business and seen the opportunity to deliver coffee to his local customer base, even if it's just in the powder format for them to make for themselves. And he's delivering coffee on his bike to within a 4-mile radius. So I think there are often opportunities, you know, to exploit the current situation in the right way. So, you know, it's kind of, have you thought about those? Have you taken advantage of those. I think if there's aren't commercial opportunities there for you, there are huge amounts of non-commercial opportunities that you can leverage right now. And probably these programs we're running are our example of that. There's no commercial benefit in these, but clearly what we can do is help people as much as we can in these times, and we're trying to do that. And I think the question for you here is kind of how will you be remembered? We've talked a lot to people about, that we know the examples of the organisations that have behaved badly in this time, and they may well get their comeuppance at the end of all this. There are certainly companies that have been very proactive in doing the right things, and and we all know who they are. But I think what sits in the middle, and I think this is where actually most businesses sit, is actually the people that are quiet and silent and are doing nothing wrong. But I think the risk here is when we come out of this at the end and we talk to our customers again, and they look at us and go, well, it's been a horrendous 3, 5, 6 months, and we've come out, but kind of where were you? And if I didn't need you in the last 3, 4, 5 months, I'm not sure I still need you going forward. So I think you need to think about, what can we be doing to reach out, to help, support, just be there for our customers. And they may not be commercial things, but to make sure that, we get remembered as the people that were there and stood by their side when they needed us. I think another thing to pick out of this is the recession. Now, clearly we're in a forced recession as we still sit in lockdown, but ultimately we come out of this and we will be in a recession. The only question mark will be probably for how long and how deep. But I just kind of but think, when we're in a recession, perspective gets lost. When a recession isn't a complete destruction of an industry. So even if our recession is, a 20% shrink of the market, 80% of the market will still be in existence. So I think we need to remember that, the world won't completely end, and it will be those that kind of keep going and fight hard that will succeed in whatever size market is left during that recessionary period. And I think the other thing with the recession is to think of winners and losers, because the kind of numbers that get spouted out to us are, aggregated averages. And the truth is that there will be markets in the recession that will do worse than the aggregate, but there will be some that will do better, and there will be some that stay much the same. So just recognizing that there will be a market there, and there will be parts of the market that will be very successful, some that will be the same yet, and some that will probably do very, very badly. But I think working that through is really, really critical as you go through. And probably my last point here in terms of perspective is I think people get a bit paralyzed as we move into a recession, and there are no laws, as far as I know. We've got a couple of lawyers on the webinar today. They might tell me differently at the end of this, that stop you changing, and I don't think there are any barriers. They're mainly just ourselves in our own heads. So if you need to change, nobody's stopping you apart from you. So I think that's worth bearing in mind, and don't paralyze yourself. Okay, so as well as making these quite punchy, I also want to make sure through these sessions that we give you a couple of useful tools. So this is the first tool I wanted to share with you in terms of kind of maybe trying to flush out how you might find opportunities to do something a little bit different in the short term. This model came from a great book called A More Beautiful Question that was written, kind of shows how the concept of the book essentially is that children or human beings learn in a more accelerated way between the ages of about 0 and 5, and post 5, which is when we go to school, it decelerates hugely. And really the big difference between a 0 to 5-year-old and a 5+ is that we learn in our early years just by asking loads of questions, and then we go to school and get told to stop asking questions and listen, and then our learning decelerates. So this kind of tries to bring back that whole concept of we learning through questioning and challenging. I think it's pretty much the basis of educational systems like Singapore now that are kind of leading the world. And there's a simple model in here that I can share with you, which I think you can use. So the idea is you need to come up with your question, which is kind of your why can't we question. So if you I was challenged by my coach about 3 months ago as we came into this and said, Jason, why can't you recover every single piece of lost revenue by the middle of May? And it kind of made me sort of go back to this model and do an exercise similar to this. But ultimately, why can't we do something? What do we want to do? And then the idea then is just to kind of what if. So I don't mean what if what if the world ended, but what if we tried something? So what if we went online and just go crazy? There's rules to this model. So when you do this, there can be no debate. There are no answers. There are just questions. You need to make sure you write exactly as you hear the question. And if somebody makes a statement, make sure you change it into a what if question. And at the end of that, the principle is we just need to ask ourselves, how will we now go and do that? So in terms of how to do this exercise, I think I've given you a handout on this, is I would just use it like this, why can't we question in the middle? Something you'd really like to try and achieve or get back to. Go crazy with your what ifs. At the end of that, select the best what if that you've came from that, or from the collection of what ifs, you might come up with a brand new what if. And then with that what if, just now go away and ask yourself, how will we make that happen? And you'll find that a really creative way to kind of flesh out some really great ideas and actually galvanize the team into really tackling something you want to achieve without the barriers of all the reasons why it isn't possible. Okay, so I'll just move on from that now. The last part of today was kind of talking about how we need to challenge our model, because if we're going to adapt, and for some, I think there's more than adapt, there's a complete pivot into a different world. We worked with a business back in the GFC in 2008, where they didn't just need to adapt, they had to completely re-engineer their business model. And they were a £50 million business that pretty much collapsed. And I can tell you now, they're still a £50 million business, but they do nothing today that they did in 2008. So pivoting is not only sometimes necessary, it's totally possible, and usually scale isn't a barrier if you're truly committed to it. So I think the first thing I'd say on challenging your model is that definitely look at some lessons learned. So whether you're from the school of continuous improvement, or the more of the army mindset in terms of debriefing what went before, there's definitely some lessons learned from our model. And what I'd probably say is that most things that have been exposed in COVID-19 weren't because of COVID-19. There were probably things in your model that were weak or could have been improved previously. And of course, what's happened now is COVID's shone a massive light on that and exposed them. And even in my own business, we have a strong consultancy business based around fairly large retainers. We also have our director circle, which is more of a business leader community. But it was very heavily weighted towards the retainer and consultancy business, which is a great business, except, in a recession or in a COVID-19 situation, that gets eroded quite significantly. So even we've had to think about that from a model perspective and actually say, probably our business was upside down. So we've spent the last 6 weeks just completely, not changing our business, but changing the model upside down and putting more emphasis on the director circle with the consultancy behind it, supporting it. So there's probably, for most people, some adaptation when you think about your lessons learned that you can move to, as I said, but for some people, it might be beyond that. The other thing I wanted to share with you is I think what COVID-19 has brought us is a big new customer opportunity. So what we're definitely seeing now is customers have more time. They're certainly more available. And I think what that, along with the severity of the situation we're in, is that there's a definite willingness to break loyalty and try different things and try different relationships. And I think for those people that are out there and are busy, are talking to the world, engaging with prospects and markets, they're just so surprised how things that previously didn't work for them. So, and I lose count of the amount of people that say, God, I can't believe how many people are engaging with me on LinkedIn, for example, but they're finding that people are more open to things. So that's, for me, is a huge opportunity. And for those that aren't doing that, of course, the flip side is it's a huge risk, because if you're not out there engaging with these people that have time on their side and a mentality to look at different things, either through necessity or just because they have the time to do it, you'll probably find your competitors are. So there's a huge risk for you as well, with your customers are prepared to break their loyalty with you. So I think, as I mentioned before, there's definitely the question mark about whether you adapt or pivot, or maybe for some it's a bit of both. And what I wanted to share here, sorry, let me just go back. So I just wanted to talk on this one as well. There's definitely, we see this almost in every recession. I think we've suddenly realized, I think, looking at this over many recessions and into COVID, is that when we look at the best salespeople, they seem to have better numbers in a recession than they do in normal times. So when I talk about, are you paralyzed and not talking to this marketplace that's more open, good salespeople continue to do that, and good business people continue to do that. But because other people tend to get a bit paralyzed and either bemoan a recession or bemoan a situation we're in now, they tend to find actually there's more for them to get at. So that's another thing I wanted to share with you, is that great salespeople almost always in recession post bigger numbers than they do in normal times. And I'm convinced it's because the paralysis of everybody else. So if you are paralyzed and not taking advantage of this opportunity, I think you definitely need to get up there and do that. Okay, so I said, a need to adapt versus pivot. So there's definitely that challenge of model, and there's a million and one things I could share with you about developing your model. But I think what I wanted to show you as a very practical tool is something we call the products around. And I think this is useful because clearly there's a lot of noise in the market and a lot of questions from our customer base that might impact how our positioning of our model might change in the future. So how the products around works is, it works on the premise that whatever you do, so let's use a bank as an example. If you're a bank, just to be a basic bank, 80% of the cost of that comes from just being a basic bank. But the actual impact on your customers of I'm just a bank is fairly limited. We say 20%. It's kind of the things we put around our core offering that make the biggest difference and add the difference value to our clients, but ultimately actually cost us less. So everything about what you offer your market, your clients, your prospective clients, is about what you put around your core product. And I won't use a bank as an example, mainly because I know I've got a bank on the line, and also that's probably a road to hell at question time. So I thought I'd use something a bit simpler, which is a corporate catering business. So the first thing you do with a corporate catering business here is what we do is we look out to what the market says. So what we want to ask ourselves is, what are the people in this market saying? So I've used an obvious example for this, but clearly at the moment people would be saying, oh, we're tired of cooking at home, and within those businesses they've had a problem already before this of retaining chefs, which may become even more difficult moving forward. Clearly now we have no corporate events, customers are now at home, so that's something we do know. And as a consequence of all those things that are being said in the market, the challenges, the issues and the frustrations of the customer, what we can start to ask ourselves is, what could we offer around our core business that might match those? So in this obvious example, we could now do a new low-cost home delivery menu. We could outsource our kitchen, so we don't need to worry about having chefs. We can give that to almost like a factory-type kitchen environment that's quite common these days. We could revise our contact program because our customers are now in their homes and we're not relying on footfall. We can use things like Uber Eats. We could change our menus nightly to kill the boredom of people cooking at home and make them maybe buy from us more regularly. So the challenge with this is to suggest that, again, just ignore your business that is currently, really just brainstorm out kind of what is your world saying now, probably as a consequence of COVID, and rethink about the things you could build around your core offering that they would truly value based on what they're currently saying about your space. I think this is a little bit more complex than it is when we normally do this, in that you maybe want to short term it more, because everything is quite short term at the moment. So you might want to think about customer problems just in the next 6 to 12 months as well as longer term, because I think that it's going to be a rocky road for lots of people. Obviously think about the strategies and adaptations that you'll need to align and vision to post COVID-19. So you do want it to have some longevity in whatever you decide. Clearly you want to know what's working for you, what you're already trying. Bear in mind, I think, because there is so much uncertainty and because things are moving quite rapidly, you will need to adapt this several times. The days of doing this once and going, that's it, you probably need to do it, try it, and probably refine it as you go over the coming months. Definitely look at best practice. I think there's always some lessons learned in industries that aren't like ours. I think it's dangerous to just look within your own industry. And obviously, still look at the competitors, but, just try and pick the best from them. Don't get obsessed by everything that they do. So I've given you a handout on that. Again, we'll take some questions at the end if there's any questions on that. But I think just two final thoughts. One is just to reiterate that sales effort point I made previously. We do know that great businesses double their marketing and or sales effort in a crisis. So don't go quiet is probably the message there. I'm not saying you're going to spend a huge amount of money with a marketing agency, but you need to be out there, you need to be talking. People are still trading, people are waking up and looking for things. So make sure you're visible and people can hear you, and really get on that sales effort, because while your competitors are sitting on their hands bemoaning the recession and the COVID situation, there's people that you can be talking to and doing business with. And if you're going to innovate, in terms of your adaptation, I think that the message there is imperfect is good. And a number of us, I think, on the call are in professional services, and that maybe doesn't sit well with us. But if we're going to do something different, don't try and perfect it before you go to market. You'll still be here in 12 months trying to work it out. The message here is about minimal viable product, which is a lesson from the Lean Startup book for those that are familiar with that. So have a really think about, just get enough that you think you can put out there and test. Because the quicker we can put something into the market and get some feedback on it, even if it's not what we want, you can then refine that and develop it into a more into a better product as you move forward. Okay, so as I said, I kept it punchy. I wanted to make sure we kept it within the half an hour and that we keep the floor open for lots of questions at the end. In terms of today, just I said I'll take some questions in a second, but bear in mind those survival reminders. Disaster scenario planning is there if you haven't done it, although I'm sure most of you have. But I think, you know, there's some good stuff in there just in terms of, you know, checking and balancing whether you're planning and keeping on top of that as you move forward. Checking with those stress and mindset monitors. I think it's really important we stay in tune with where our people are at. They're not always at the same place as us, and particularly our clients. And hopefully those grief stages will give you a slightly different way to look at that, a different lens, and maybe to spot where you may have some of your staff in difficult places. And that might give you a different clue as to where they're at and how you can help them. Reset your short-term vision. You know, what you need to achieve in the next 3 to 6 months may be very different now. But your summit probably hasn't changed, but your path almost certainly has. You know, you're going to need to re-navigate around that avalanche. You know, I do say at this stage, you know, I think there are a few people, you know, whose mountain has been blown up, and if it has, then obviously you do need to look for a new mountain. But I think for most businesses, you know, the summit they're aiming for is as it always was. Exploit those opportunities. There are opportunities to do things either commercially or non-commercially that will stand you in good stead going forward, so that you are seen in the right light with your clients, you know, and then work on that what if model, because I think you'll find that between not just yourself but working with your teams, there'll be some great ideas that you can move on for the short and long term. And then just finally, just challenge your model. You know, decide whether you need to adapt or whether you need to completely pivot. The product surround's a great way to start that thinking, but the big message is, you know, from a marketing and sales perspective, just get out there. Okay, so just before I take some questions, just to, I suppose, added learning, just a reminder that the 2 free courses are still open to you and your teams. We've managed to get that extended to the 15th of June. So as long as we get requests by then, we can register you for those. Your support coach, for a number of you, I think that's me, but for those where it isn't me, you know, we're here for you. Just reach out, and we will post up the recording of this webinar along with the slides and the handouts straight after the webinar, so you can pick those up and reflect on them, share them with your teams, whatever you need to do. Okay, so I'm gonna come out of there now, stop the share, and I know this is always the painful bit where we wonder if there's going to be any questions. I think what I've learned over the last few weeks is it's okay to sit here for 2 or 3 minutes while people reflect on that. But I think what I'd probably ask is if anybody wants to table a question or even just a conversation or debate point or a challenge, please stick your hand up and I'll give you the floor. Or if you're not comfortable with that, stick something in the chat area or the Q&A, and I'll read it out from here. Okay, so Graham, I'm going to give Graham the floor. Can you hear me, Graham?
Yep, can you hear me, Jason?
Yeah, I can hear you, Graham. All
Perfect.
yours.
Thank you. So really useful. Thank you for that. Certainly some things to take away. Now, one of the things just around the kind of a more beautiful question and looking at doing those kind of brainstorming ideas, how have you, or what techniques have you used, adopted, or seen that can get a group of people who potentially tend to be stuck in their own particular way of thinking, but to get them actually to open up and really get the sort of creative juices flowing?
So yeah, so where you've got, so taking the way you've positioned that, where you've got a team probably that don't believe things are possible, I actually start almost by feeding that by saying, you know, almost try and get them talking about the things that they don't think we can do. So you say we want to grow our business by 20% and they just don't believe it. I almost get them to say, okay, what can't we do? I'm getting feedback here.
Okay.
Stop. Yeah, so I kind of let them run with that, let them get it all out. So it's almost like we've listened to all the things you think we can't do, and then I almost then will take one of those things and go, okay, well, let's just it's almost like humor me. So we don't think it's possible to grow by 20% in the next 12 months. So let's put the question, and then the why can't we is the key. So why can't we grow by 20%? So let's write that up on the wall, you know, on a flip chart, and then go, let's just imagine anything's possible, you know, and just almost like humor me, guys. And then what if, and then they'll just start coming up with some crazy what ifs. Some of them will be ridiculous, you know. Well, what if we doubled our workforce? You know, what if the board gave us £1 million to spend on marketing, but eventually they'll start to get going. But I think the key is, it's almost like let them run with that negativity and then almost turn it back on them. But you've got to do it on the why can't we? The question needs to be why can't we? And then just let it run from there. But trust the process, it always works.
Thank you.
Does that help, Graham?
Yeah, that's useful. It's just especially when you've got individuals in a business that have been, I suppose, in a particular industry for quite a long period of time. It's trying to get that shift in mindset.
Yeah, it is. And I think you don't need to completely shift their mindset. You just need to get that why can't we question positioned, and then just don't allow anything. It has to be what if. The key, the rules I mentioned there, don't let, those rules are really important. Debate is just, there's no debate. We'll debate later. Let's just go crazy with what ifs. And if people make statements, turn them into what ifs, and then just, and don't put everything up that's said. So don't worry about the fact that some things that get said are ridiculous. Just get, you might end up with 100 what ifs on the board. But that's what will stop that negativity and that kind of fixed mindset taking over. Because what those people will do is they'll just come up with ridiculous what ifs. But that's fine, just let them do it. But then everyone else will be kicking in with some good stuff in the meantime. And at the end of it, you just pick the best stuff. I think I've dropped you out there, Graham. I think I'm gonna. Okay, so Kelly, I'm gonna give the floor to Kelly.
I'll just unmute.
Can you hear us, Kelly? Okay, I think I've got you now.
Can you hear
Okay,
me?
we can hear you now, Kelly. Yeah,
Okay.
far away.
Things I guess that resonated with me. I guess the first thing was you mentioned about kind of your teams and bringing your team on the journey. I've got I'm in the events industry. I've got quite a small team. There's 7 of us. We've been furloughed for 2 months now. I think I've been really afraid to. I'm staying in touch with them all, but I've been obviously afraid to and not asking them to do any work and all that kind of thing. So I felt quite isolated, definitely in the last month. On a welfare Zoom with them all last week, I mentioned a couple of positive things that we'd been approached by a couple of clients that I've been keeping in touch with on for some Christmas ideas. And straight away, all the team were like, oh my God, we've got this idea, we've got that. And so then I had a Zoom with them all again today, which it was voluntary if they wanted to come on it. I said, but it was only because they said, why don't we do this? Where they all came back and they basically had started put a load of new ideas together, things that and ways that we can pivot our events towards obviously what's happening with kind of you self-isolating Santas and things like that. But I guess I've been really afraid to bring them on my journey of looking at the new products around, because I've been doing that by myself, thinking, I can't really ask them, they're on furlough, but having mentioned to them that actually this is what I'm working on, all of them wanted to input and they want to be creative again. And so I think that if you can find an opportunity to do that, and it's for me today, my products around, I'd already got some ideas on, different ways that we can start to kind of keep the wheels turning, but pivot the way we're working. But then today, having had that Zoom with them, I've now got some even better ones from that. I feel that it's really motivated the team. They're all really, who knows when we're going to be back, our industry, we work in shopping centres, doesn't reopen obviously till the 15th. So who knows when and what that will look like when we come back. But it was really good to get their insight into our kind of new journey and where we'll be going.
Yeah, no, I think there's a couple of things you said there I think are really powerful. One is, I think you mentioned welfare. I think some of the best leaders I've seen, they are putting huge amounts of time and keeping in contact with their furloughed staff and just checking in. I think that comes into that non-commercial opportunity. It's not just non-commercial with your customers, it's non-commercial with your staff, just invest in that. Arguably it is commercial because their well-being helps commerciality, but I think just reaching out and just checking in with them and making sure they're okay, I think, that needs to happen for me as a leader. I think the other thing you talk, and it's tricky, isn't it? Because the furlough, and I'm not a lawyer, but the furlough rules are fairly strict, and I think you're not allowed to work. But when you were talking, there's a part of the Shackleton story that resonates, which is Shackleton was really good at making sure his team every day had something productive to do, and very often he'd set them on tasks or missions that he knew were completely pointless and weren't actually going to help them achieve what they needed to achieve, but it gave everybody a sense of purpose. I think that's kind of what you've kind of stumbled on unwittingly there. So I suppose what I think from my perspective, it's how can you do more of that but without breaking the furlough rules is probably the question, really. But yeah, people will want to be engaged. People do need purpose. People do need, they need all the things you said. The chest is just doing it within the rules. That's probably the challenge. But yeah, I think I'm not surprised. Do more as much as you can, or in a way that you can. I think there are certain things that people can do rather than furlough. So I'm sure somebody more knowledgeable on that than me can probably help with that.
Yeah. Just on a second note, obviously all of my team have enrolled on your 2 free courses and had some great feedback from some of them this morning, particularly on the time management and some of those that they've really enjoyed it, and they've been doing some of the training courses, but they've really got a lot out of it. So just wanted to say thank you for that. And again, I guess it's just, especially now the weather's turned, people are looking for, ways to develop themselves and try and keep themselves on top of their industry and on, and on top of their game. And it's been a great help for my team. So thank you.
Yeah, no, I think the learning is one thing. It's not for everybody, but I've got a client who's in online learning, and their business has gone through the roof in this period of time. So I think clearly people are definitely enjoy a bit of learning when times like this. So no, it's pleasure. Thank you, Kelly.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, I've got a question just on the Q&A here from Ralph. So it said, how do you know if your summit is blown up? Is it complete devastation? Just be there for our customers. Sounds good, but if our customers are all depressed, how do you know if the market is gone and it's time for us to focus on a new summit, or it's there? It's just very contracted right now. Yeah. Okay. So, and I suppose because I know Ralph's world, and Ralph supplies essentially the hotel industry predominantly. And I think there's an argument that says, if I'm thinking about that as a market, the whole hotel industry, the mountain hasn't been blown up because it is still there. But clearly, I think the avalanche that's hit that mountain is huge. But I think there is a question that when that clears, whether that avalanche was so big, whether part of that mountain does get eroded. So whether it will be the same size mountain, I think is definitely questionable. So I think what I'd say, Ralph, is probably because the avalanche is so big. I don't think you necessarily abandon that mountain, but I'm not sure you'd want to put all your team on that one mountain. And I know we've had some conversations about looking for some new summits. So it's probably there's probably where there's a bit of a pivot there that says we need to put some resources into some different expeditions. I'm trying to keep the same language. My analogy is running out now. But yeah, I think there's a question mark about if the avalanche is huge and it's going to take a long time to get around it. There may be questions about whether it's even worth trying. There's probably definitely a question mark that says we need to probably not have all our eggs in one basket, and I think that probably goes back to challenging your model and lessons learned that any of us that were kind of too exposed into one area, probably that's a flaw in a business model in truth. And so even if it's going to come back, probably in the future we probably want to be sustainable. We probably need more than one market open to us, because that always leaves us a little bit vulnerable. So hopefully that answered your question, Ralph. I'm sure you'll grumble on that more later when I speak to you. Any more hands? So I'm just checking the chat. I haven't got an assistant today, so I'm doing this on my own. Okay, so I've got just another question here. So some of us are actually quite busy during COVID. Problem is workforce motivation is super low, and I feel this may explode at some point. Any tips on maintaining team morale and motivation? We are tired of Zoom pub quizzes. Yeah, I know. I'm even lying to my family now about my availability for Zoom quizzes. Hopefully they're not listening. So I suppose the challenge with this question is kind of why the motivation is low. So it might go back to my slide on, where people are at. Maybe, if you're really, really busy trying to survive, you may have a situation of exhaustion going on. and you say they're about to explode, that leads them to think that. So it's hard with that context, because motivation is tricky as well, because motivation is not a one size fits all. Everyone's motivated slightly differently, but I think generally, if you're really, really busy trying to survive, then I think you might have to ask yourself, you know, are they just exhausted? You know, there's no point, you know, if you've got horses, you can't just keep flogging the same horse, it will break at some point. Just my team around motivation. Yeah, I think I'm trying to read between the lines on this one, so apologies for this, which is why I always prefer the hands up. But yeah, I mean, clearly, if you're just doing the same stuff all the time, then I think, yeah, a bit of creativity. You know what, in terms of you're looking for ways just to engage people differently and come up with some different ideas, I'd what if on, you know, why can't we have more fun? Would be a great question on a what if, and then let people go crazy on the what if, and I think you get some good ideas on that. If you want, that's a big question. If you want to hit me with that afterwards with a bit more context, because I'm just concerned I've not really answered that effectively, then please do so. So Simon, regarding Rouse Point, as you know, we are firmly in the hotel market. We've used the last 8 weeks to reset our sales pipeline and have 1,000 new leads in new markets, care homes, hospitals, and garden centres, markets that are open. Yeah, absolutely. And that's really interesting. And Simon, I work with Simon's boss, who's the MD there, and 99% of their business was in the hotel trade. And I pushed him really, really hard about 6 to 8 weeks ago, a bit with a why can't we question about, because there was a bit of, in the language of that particular leader, a lot of language about, you know, we're just paralyzed, we just got to sit and wait. And I'm like, well, why can't you go out and start, you know, building your sales pipeline in these other areas? So to hear you've got 1,000 new leads in other markets in the space of what is probably less than 6 weeks, that's awesome, Simon. Great to hear. And that's probably a message for people on the call, that actually you can get out there and make things happen. Just do it in a sensitive way, because hard selling when people are in difficult times is not going to get you any friends. But yeah, that's great to hear. Okay, we've got any more hands? I've got some. I think we're no more in the chat. I think I've answered all the questions in the Q&A. Happy to take one or two more if anybody wants to ask a question. If anybody wants to stick their hand up, I'm happy to give you the floor. I'll leave that for a couple more minutes if anybody wants to do that. Okay, I'll let the silence roll for another 30 seconds or so, because I know sometimes people like just a bit of time to think. But if there's nothing else after that, then we'll wrap up. Okay, so I think we're there. I think we've taken all the questions. So just thank you again for joining us. As I said, reach out to your coach post-session if there's any questions or anything you want to go through in more detail. As I said, there's a question or two there that I think might need a little bit more context that we'll be happy to help you with. Jump on those free courses, as Kelly said, if either for yourself or for your teams. And we look forward to seeing you next Friday. Have a good day.